From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. Later on in our program this morning, we'll be talking with the very first Republican to line up to run against Burgess Owens. That's in the 4th Congressional District. Jake Hunsaker will join us. And of course, everybody's focused on what's happening in Afghanistan. We'll also be right on top of that. But first, as we sat down earlier in the week with Mitt Romney, we talked about the $3.5 trillion budget that the House approved this week, and with that, locking in a September vote on the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. We asked Senator Romney what that might do to and for the state of Utah. There's a bit of an elephant in the room right now, or on the horizon, somewhere out there. We're at the Great Salt Lake. This is the state park, the marina. And Senator Romney, you chose this spot to do this interview today. Why are we here?
Well, I think it's important for everybody in Utah to understand that as the climate continues to change, we're going to have to change as well. And our use of water is going to have to change in some ways we can't really contemplate right now. But we can't afford to have this lake go dry because it's full of magnesium and arsenic and other elements that would go into the dust and would poison people all along the Wasatch Front. So we can't allow that to happen, and we're seeing it happen before our eyes right now. It's getting smaller and smaller, drier and drier, so we're going to have to make some changes. And at the federal level, we've decided we're going to try and help. So myself and Senator Merkley of Oregon have put together legislation to say, let's study these saline lakes and make sure we can preserve them, because having them go dry and sending that dust into the environment would be deadly for our citizens.
I wonder, too, about the wildlife and just the historic nature of this lake. As you know, my wife Dee is from Missouri. Every time, especially when we were newly married, everybody that came out to Utah from Missouri to visit us, first thing they wanted to see, if not Temple Square, was the Great Salt Lake. And we'd all kind of go, okay, we'll go out. And it was in the middle of summer, which isn't the ideal time. But what about the wildlife? What about the tourist attraction? What about just the historic significance of this amazing body of water?
Well, Doug, as we mentioned, as a boy, I came here, went swimming. I went on the roller coaster at Saltaire, and of course, those days are over. But wildlife still comes through this area. Migratory birds in the hundreds of thousands land along the lake and are therefore able to go on to their ultimate destination. So it's important from an ecological standpoint to keep this lake vibrant and alive as well. By the way, our largest export from Utah is shrimp, brine shrimp from the lake. We manufacture magnesium by virtue of all the magnesium that's in the water here. We're the sole place in the United States where magnesium is manufactured, which is essential to make anything out of aluminum. So we really have a number of economic and environmental elements associated with this lake. But the biggest single element is, of course, the health of our citizenry, because an empty lake would be devastating.
Absolutely, and one can't help but wonder what it would do to the world-renowned salt flats, where we have racers come from all over the world. Movies have been made out there. I wonder what effect it would have on that.
Yeah, I mean, an empty lake not only puts pollution into the air and would poison us, but it also puts dust on top of the snow, and that dust on the snow means the snow would melt faster, and so we'd get less water coming into our reservoirs and streams. We'd dry the lake up faster. So this is something we've thought about for some time, but it's really time for us at the national level as well as at the state level to say, okay, what are we going to do? How can we act to preserve this lake and to make sure that we have the water necessary for agriculture and for culinary use as well?
When agriculture uses 82% of the state's water, you do wonder, you know, exactly how you make the difference in the lake and how you take these steps, and realizing you're just beginning to take these steps, and studies and all kinds of things will be happening. Anything being floated about? What are some of the solutions that are being considered?
Well, first of all, agriculture uses a lot of the water. You're right, 70–80% of the water, although they put back about half of what they take out. So when you look at the net, it's not as large a portion as that 80% number would suggest. But you have to look and say, all right, how many cuttings do we want to have of alfalfa? Does the state want to perhaps purchase some of the water rights so that we don't take too much water out of some of the key feeder rivers that come into this lake? Homeowners, do we want to make sure that we have meters, for instance, on secondary water to make sure we're not using more water for sprinkling our lawns? The water that goes to people's residences, 2/3 is used to water the lawn. So, you know, you go to places like Phoenix, Arizona, they don't have lawns, all right? And we do. And we have, for instance, you know, strips in our highways with grass in it. Well, we probably don't need those. And so those are the kinds of things that are being looked at. And there's some really capable people that are looking at these issues and saying, okay, what are the trade-offs? There are even some states, by the way, that pay people to take out their lawn and actually pay them and say, because we want to reduce the amount of water. So I don't know which of those solutions will be ultimately landed upon. But that's something we want to see studied at the national level, make sure our best and brightest are looking at this lake and other saltine lakes in the country. And it's going to be studied right here. And we'll get there, but we can't just keep pretending that everything's going to get better. We've got to take the precaution that what happens if this is the new normal? We don't know what the future is going to hold. But if it keeps on like it is, we're going to have to make some changes.
It was a little over a year ago that you and we were up by the Bonneville Lakeshore Trail.
Yes.
And you had been doing some work on that. Maybe you could give us, since it's somewhat related, I mean, back a million years ago, we'd be underwater right now by a long shot. But what about the trail and the interconnectivity of it? How's that coming?
Well, good news is that the Environment and Natural Resources Committee decided to have a hearing on that trail and whether it was appropriate to do the land swap that would allow us to connect the entire Bonneville Shore Trail. And I was able to testify before that committee. And I think we have a receptive committee. As you know, Washington is right now consumed with two things: Afghanistan, overwhelmingly, and then secondarily the infrastructure bill, and then, well, the third level would be the president's massive $3.5 trillion spending plan. So getting this committee to actually put out a bill and mark it up with our Bonneville Trail is a task ahead of us. But I think that's something that ought to happen within the next year.
As we talk here, you've been doing quite a tour, you know, through and around various spots here in the state of Utah, getting the lay of the land, including the drought, including the wildfires. And I think not long, maybe tomorrow, I think you're going to be flying over the Parley's Canyon fire. What kind of impact are you anticipating, and what can be done? Because with the drought comes the additional threats. Everything you mentioned about dust and, you know, things of that nature, but also just the dryness in our forests and the danger of the forest fires. California, Oregon, we have dealt with it in the past, this year too, to a small degree. What do we do?
Well, if what we've seen over the last 10 years is going to be the future, why, we're going to have to rethink how we deal with fire and wildfires. And there are lots of different points of view as to what's the right thing to do. How do we manage our forests better? How do we manage our grazing lands better? And, you know, I have my ideas as to what I think ought to be done, but those ideas are not based on data necessarily. They're based on my preconceived notions. And so part of this legislation, the infrastructure bill that we passed, creates a commission which is made up of people inside government but largely outside government to look across the country and say, okay, how is the most effective way to deal with wildfires? Do we need to bring in a lot more heavy aircraft to lift water up for reservoirs to dump on flames? Do we need more heavy lift helicopters? How do we manage our forests better? How do we reclaim after a fire to make sure we don't have massive mudslides that end up polluting our water system? So all these things we now have to study in a way we haven't in the past, in part because of what we're seeing in the American West.
Right now, where we sit, we see a dramatic lesson. We can't see to Antelope Island. We can't see to downtown Salt Lake City. There's no hope of seeing the Wasatch Mountains or the Stansburys. We can, since we're sitting right at the foothills, we can see the Oakers. But what a difference. In my lifetime, I've never seen this.
Yeah, well, California is on fire. And this isn't even the height of the fire season for California. and Oregon is on fire. And of course, we've had fires here in Utah as well. Given how dry it is and the fact that there's so much fuel that has not been harvested from our forests, this has become a real issue for us. And just to pretend it's going to go away on its own is, I'm afraid, wishful thinking. And we're going to have to develop a far more effective strategy, because, by the way, if a foreign enemy were doing this to us and burning our crops and burning down homes, well, we'd be defending with billions of dollars of effort. But when it comes to wildfires, we really haven't changed our game plan, and we're going to have to do that.
We are going to continue the conversation that we had earlier in the week with Senator Mitt Romney when we come back and the topic changes to the growing crisis in Afghanistan. Stay with us. We continue our conversation now with Senator Mitt Romney, and the topic changed to Afghanistan. We probably ought to address Afghanistan, realizing that by the time this program airs, as we are talking right now, it's Thursday. But as this airs on Friday, who knows what will transpire in Afghanistan. But boy, as of today, Thursday, as we sit here, the news is not good. And we think it's ISIS, maybe ISIS-K, that has attacked in two different places, a hotel and at the airport. And so sadly, not only injuries in those suicide bombings, but casualties, deaths as well. Your thoughts, you appeared before our KSL and Deseret News editorial board earlier this week, and you had some real thoughts on where perhaps some of the real responsibility for what we're seeing unfolding and the discouraging side of it, there's some blame to be had in two presidents particularly.
Yeah, well, I want to acknowledge at the outset that my heart goes out to the families and loved ones of those that were lost in Afghanistan just this week. Apparently 10 Marines, as many as 60 Afghans, and the final numbers aren't in. By the time this show airs, there'll be final figures, I'm sure. But it's just a tragedy of an enormous dimension. And we didn't have to be here in this mess. I actually think that we should have retained a presence in Afghanistan to make sure that the Taliban was not able to reestablish itself, and Al-Qaeda would not have a safe base upon which they could launch more attacks against us. I mean, the reason we went to Afghanistan in the first place was to get rid of Al-Qaeda to the extent we could, and to keep the Taliban from being able to allow them in there, and to exact justice on the Taliban as well. And the people who over 20 years have served there, and some have lost lives there over the last 20 years, they were there to protect us and to keep Al-Qaeda from coming back in, and they did so effectively. That was not in vain. So I disagreed with pulling out, but once you decide you're going to pull out, as President Trump did, I think he made a big mistake by pulling out and setting the date to pull out during fighting season. That was a mistake. Normally the Taliban is home in the winter. That was the time to pull out, not during fighting season. Number two, we should have begun immediately to process visas for people who were our friends, to be able to get them into this country legally. Number three, we should have identified all the Americans in the country and how to contact them so we could get them out safely. We should have established pickup points in the negotiation with the Taliban to say, here's how from the various provinces we're going to get people out. That wasn't done. Then a new president came in, and I think he was mistaken to follow the blueprint that was established by President Trump, but he did. And again, there was not the rapid deployment of getting people visas, pulling people out early, giving up the Bagram Air Force Base. That was a mistake. There are just so many mistakes made, and of course, one of the major mistakes was not recognizing how quickly Afghanistan would fall. I understand that was a hard thing to predict, but it should have been potentially considered as a risk. Fortunately, the president had 5,000 troops he could move in quickly to try and secure the air base and the airport, rather, and also heavy lift aircraft to get people out. You acknowledge how many people have come out over the last several days, but this didn't have to be this kind of a crisis process, and with a loss of life that we've seen.
Senator, maybe quickly you could tell us, what is your impression? How is the world reacting to this? How are our allies reacting to this?
Well, I just spoke today with the ambassador of one of our major allies, and the world is distraught. The world is upset that we didn't coordinate this with them. that we made a political issue out of a national security issue. They're concerned that we did not have in place the kind of plans that would allow for a smooth evacuation of our Afghan friends who've worked with us and fought with us during these last 20 years. And it's been a major blow to the credibility of the United States of America. And if over the coming decades we need help from others, they're going to be less likely to come to our aid. And those who already rely on us, like the Taiwanese, are probably going to be wondering, can we rely on America? And China, by the way, is out there promoting propaganda saying, you can't trust the Americans. Look what they've done in Afghanistan. This has a major impact. And by the way, we care about the world, not just because we love people around the world, which we do, but because we want to protect America. The reason we're in these other places is to keep America more safe. And the idea that, oh, let's bring everybody home. Well, let me tell you, we can get attacked, or conflict can erupt that ultimately sucks us in, as happened during the Second World War. So, I mean, the reason we have troops in Germany today, tens of thousands in Germany and in South Korea, the reason we have troops there, the reason we have these troops located around the world is to protect us. And it's in our interest. And I'm saddened that we haven't recognized the importance of keeping some presence in Afghanistan, particularly when the lion's share of protecting Afghanistan has been borne by the Afghan forces of over 250,000 people. They've suffered 50,000 deaths helping protect that nation. And we've had a few thousand there backing them up. Pulling out that backbone was devastating.
All of us are just holding our breath to see what the aftermath might be. A lot of talk of refugees and so on, countries around the world. I talked with Senator Lee last week about this, and I know you're working with him, all of our Utah delegation, of course. What are you anticipating when it comes to refugees and the impact on the entire world, on the United States, and what is Utah's role?
Well, of course, we have to recognize just the scale here, which is there will be, I don't know, as many as 100,000 Afghan refugees that will want to come into the country. But we're having almost that many come every month from Latin America across our border illegally. So we're a big country, and we can accommodate those who are coming legally as these Afghan refugees would. And they would only come here after they've been thoroughly vetted and made sure that they're going to contribute to America, not attack America. So they will come here, and I hope each of us in our respective communities does exactly what Governor Cox has done and said, hey, we're going to welcome these folks. They will be hardworking, committed to freedom, and I mean, I personally am very anxious to see these folks come in. This morning I met with a number of manufacturers, maybe 20 different manufacturers in Utah. They're desperate for more workers. Well, hopefully some additional workforce is on its way.
Senator, it's always such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Doug. Good to see you again.
So sadly, since we did sit down and talk with Senator Romney, he alluded to this, that obviously the numbers would change, and we have very, very sadly learned that a fellow Utahn, Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, was among those who have died. And certainly our thoughts and our prayers are with his family and friends today. When we come back, we will be talking with the very first person from the Republican Party to step up and announce that he will run against Burgess Owens. That's coming. The first Republican in the state of Utah to announce that he is going to step up and run against Burgess Owens is now joining us on Sunday Edition. And Jake Hunsaker, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And let me start off with the obvious question. What was the motivating factor? Why are you stepping up to run in the 4th District?
Well, Doug, it's great to be here with you and your viewers today. Thank you so much for having me. And let me say this, when I think about the party that I grew up in, the Republican Party of, I call the 90s, you know, coming off of the heels of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and the victory in the Cold War and Desert Storm and all of these things, and I look at the principled leadership that my parents taught me that we should look for in the party and the principled conservatism that we so desperately need in the country, I don't see that in many cases in our leadership right now in the Republican Party. And frankly, it's disconcerting for me thinking about how we maintain viability for the party long term. We need to be bringing in new voters. We need to be picking issues that really, really resonate with people who are trying to solve the difficult challenges of today. And we need moral and good leaders that don't play to our fears and incite, and instead they inspire and bring out the best in us. And in some ways, I don't see that in the representation here in District 4, which is why I've put my name in the ring.
I think many Republicans would sympathize with what you are saying, especially those who consider themselves to be either more old school or more mainstream Republicans, because as Ronald Reagan would always talk about, the big all-inclusive tent where everybody was welcome. And I think of George Herbert Walker Bush, who talked about compassionate conservatism and also kept talking. He had the 1,000 points of light, and he also said that we needed to be a kinder, gentler nation. And I think many people, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, are afraid that there has been a rather substantial drift.
I believe that as well. We talk about the big tent mentality that you just mentioned, compassionate conservatism. Personally, I think that compassion is at the root, at the very center of what it means to be conservative, that we allow people to chart their own courses and be the determinants of their own destiny. And that we're there to support our neighbors on a local level. All of those things are compassionate principles for me. And that really, really resonates. Two things that I think have come into play recently are this, extremism and vilification of the other side. The idea that we cannot even work with anyone outside of our narrow view of politics because their motives are so evil or perceived to be so evil that there's just such a disconnect between what we all want. And that's not really the case. And actually, that mentality, peddled by opportunistic politicians over time, has gotten us into this place where we're so fractured and broken that things that are really pressing and really complex and require our attention are getting ignored. And I think we need more representation that will solve the issues and put aside the toxicity of the politics to really drive progress for the voters here in District 4.
Jake, perhaps you could take, and we only have a minute or two left, just very quickly, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're 32 years of age. I was looking at your music resume. Fill us in, give us some of the in-between-the-lines information.
I'm lucky to have spent most of my life here in Utah. I grew up youngest of a family of 11 children in an agricultural community. My first job was milking cows. My second job was picking sweet corn. And Utah is part of who I am. This community is core to who I've become as an adult and what I care about most deeply. And you're right, I have spent some time singing. Hopefully I won't lose too much of my voice on the campaign trail because I love music and I was a member of the Tabernacle Choir. But this community is so important to me. And Utah politics and Utah voters have shown time and time again that they're not fans and they're not supporters of this really extreme approach to politics that's so divisive and so toxic. And so I hope to tap into that optimistic version of governing and governance in this campaign.
Jake, we're going to keep a real close eye on this campaign, especially in the 4th Congressional District. We're hearing lots of rumblings right now. So we thank you for your time today on Sunday Edition. And for those who would like to learn more, what's the website? How do people find out more about you?
Thank you. I'm in District 4, so it's jake4congress.com. I'm on all of the social media platforms as well. We really have a lot of good momentum. We've gotten a lot of traction and a lot of groundswell support here in Utah and in District 4 because this matters now more than ever. Thank you so much, Doug, for having me.
Thank you, Jake Hunsaker, with us. That does it for our program this morning, Sunday edition. And speaking of